I work as a private investigator, and it's not at all as glamorous as you would think. Nearly all of my cases involve spying on cheating spouses. I'm really the only PI in the area, so if you have a cheating spouse, I'm the only real option. I've never helped the police on a case and figured that was something movies and books had made up. I've done 2 missing person cases, but in the end, I didn't find anything useful, so I didn't charge them for my time. I sent the cases off to other PIs a few cities away. They also came up empty, even with police connections, and that did make me feel slightly less useless. In short, my career has been pitiful. Nothing interesting has ever happened. I felt as if I would be stuck with cheating cases until I died. Then I met him. I was sitting in my car waiting for a couple to come out of a motel. I'd gotten shots of the husband and the side piece. Now I just needed a time-stamped photo of them leaving. It was boring work, and I normally played audiobooks or podcasts while I waited. Tapping on my window startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone to come up to my car. I was parked legally, so at first I assumed it was a person looking for spare change. It happened from time to time in the rougher parts of town, but the person who was trying to get my attention wasn't begging for change. He was dressed in a suit. Unable to figure out who the hell he was, I rolled down my window while keeping an eye on the motel. "You're Skylar West, correct? I'm here to ask for your assistance." He flashed an official-looking badge. His voice was monotone and emotionless. Overall, I got a weird vibe from him. He was dressed in a suit, but his hair color was unnatural. A strange orange verging on pink in the right light, and it was long enough to be pulled back into a small ponytail. He couldn't be a detective or any kind of job in law enforcement with hair dyed like that. Also, instead of calling, he approached my car. Not my office, but he cornered me on a job. "I didn't catch your name or creds. You flashed your badge way too fast," I commented, leaning out the window. He paused while placing the badge back inside his suit pocket, unaware of how quickly he showed it. His eyes creeped me out. They were dark and just as emotionless as his voice. "I apologize. I am Nicholas Flint. I work as a government agent. However, this job I'm approaching you about is more of a personal issue." He commented and let me look at his badge for as long as I wanted. It looked official, but fakes nowadays did look pretty real. If the job he wanted me to look at was personal, it would explain why he tracked me down. Most likely he didn't want to get caught being in my office or have my number on his call logs. Finding my car was easier than finding a payphone in the age of cell phones. I should have been more suspicious of him, but he gave off such a neutral vibe I trusted him enough to at least hear him out. "All right, Nikki, come on in and talk before you blow my cover," I commented while gesturing to my passenger seat. He paused again, looking as if he'd never been called by a nickname before, and was confused over who Nikki was. Before he got into my car, he took a small notebook out of his pocket and wrote something down and snapped it shut. I wondered what that was all about, but I didn't ask. He got into the car and wasted no time telling me the reason why he was there. Jenna Gates disappeared yesterday night while walking down a hiking trail with her friends. He explained and pulled out a photo of a girl no older than 10. "She looks pretty young. Aren't the cops involved? Why would you be asking me for help?" I asked, handing back the photo. "She's my niece. Due to her parents' rocky relationship, the police are set on the theory that her father took her from the trail and is hiding where she is. I don't believe that's the case. It's only been a day, but so far there are no solid plans to search the woods further," he explained, still using the same emotionless tone while talking about a missing family member. I thought about the small amount of information I received so far. Jenna and Nick looked nothing alike, which was understandable. She was his niece and could have a few reasons as to why there's no family resemblance. The cold way of speaking could just be how he was, or he pushed his emotions down to deal with the case. Still, something felt very odd about the entire thing. "So what? You're asking me for help because you're her family member and can't work the case? Is that it?" I asked with an eyebrow raised. "Correct. I could not be on this case. You are the only private detective in this city. There are others more experienced with cases such as this, however, they are too far away. I would like to start looking for her tonight if possible. I do not care about finding the one responsible for her disappearance. I would only want to find the girl safe," he explained while staring forwards. I let what he said sink in, but I wasn't convinced that girl was his niece, but why lie about something like that? Questions ran through my mind over this stranger that I invited into my car. My phone pinged and I checked it on reflex. Nicholas stayed silent as I opened my email to see a notice from my bank. My heart was fluttering, thinking what I was seeing was a mistake. $2,000 was just deposited into my account from a company I've never seen before. I looked over at the agent in my car, his face impossible to read. I arranged payment for this case. That deposit was your time hearing me out. You shall be paid more if you accept my request, whether or not the girl is found. I just require your assistance while searching for her. He said this as I felt myself sweating. This didn't make sense. Who had this kind of money to just toss around? Was he trying to lure me out to sell me into human trafficking or steal my organs? Why give me $2,000 to get me to go into the woods? I might be a PI, but that didn't mean I could see through his suspicious actions. Suddenly the agent slouched in his seat, looking nervous as if he was spotted. I looked over to the motel to see the cheating husband come out, and I snapped a few photos of him kissing someone who was not his wife. At least that job was wrapped up. Nicholas stayed hunkered down in his seat, looking slightly worried. It was good to know he could express some emotions. "What are you doing?" I asked after I finished taking the photos I needed. "You said not to blow your cover," he answered innocently. The promise of more money in my account and his reaction was what sealed the deal. This guy didn't appear to be someone with a nefarious plot, so I decided to trust him and take the job, praying it wasn't a mistake. "Where do you want me to meet you tonight?" The next few minutes was him telling me when and where we should meet. Once all the details were clear, he got out of the car and looked both ways before crossing the road and out of sight. I knew I could trust this guy, but wondered what the hell I just got myself into. I met Nicholas at the start of a local hiking trail at 6 p.m. that night. I was wearing comfy shoes for the trek. He was still in his suit and polished shoes. "Are you going hiking in a suit and tie, Nikki?" I asked, looking over to him. He didn't even have a bottle of water. He again looked confused and took out his notebook again to jot something down. Snapping it shut, he nodded. "I work a lot and do not own that much casual clothing." I wondered if he slept in a suit, but I kept that question to myself. I started along the trail with him close behind. Kept my eyes open, but didn't know what we were looking for. Having a dog to track down the scent would be nice. I've never been a part of a proper search party in the woods. Doubted this trip would result in anything but wasted time. "I don't know what we're going to find that the cops can't. I don't know anything about tracking. I feel as if you're wasting your money," I said as we walked. "The police are not focusing their efforts on this trail. The fact that we are out here looking means something. Effort is never wasted." I wanted to argue, but stayed silent. He was paying me a lot for a simple hike. We arrived where Gemma was last seen, and I took a sip of my water. I offered Nicholas some, but he refused. We both stopped to look around, hoping we would find something. It was only a few minutes from the start of the trail, and one would assume this place was safe. But something happened to that little girl. I looked along the edge and the bushes, trying to see if anything was disturbed or any obvious drag marks, but Jenna was small. A grown adult could just pick her up and run off with her. The lack of broken twigs and flattened bushes meant nothing. I still felt the entire trip was useless when something caught my eye. Tied to a tree 2 steps off the trail was something catching the light. I walked over to it and found it was a piece of candy with a foil wrapping hanging from the branch with some fishing line. It was low enough for a child to reach it. My blood turned cold, wondering how the hell the cops missed this. Unless they didn't. If Jenna saw this, she might have taken the candy, and the person who lured her away could have come overnight to set up the trap again. But why set it in the same spot, risking the police seeing it? "I think I have something." I called over to Nicholas. He quickly walked over to me, but neither of us touched the hanging candy. "Do you see any more?" he asked, and I didn't even consider looking for another piece. I scanned the trees and in a few seconds saw another twinkle of foil moving in the breeze. Nicholas pulled out a set of gloves so he could carefully look over the piece of candy we'd already found. It was just a bright pink-colored wrapping with no name brand printed on it. Was it homemade? He left it where it was and nodded to where I spotted the next piece. "We should follow the trail," he said, and I shook my head. "Shouldn't we call the cops?" "Not just yet. I doubt they're going to take 2 pieces of candy hanging from trees very seriously. Unless we find something solid to take their focus from Jenna's father, they won't pay any attention to us." "Shouldn't the police follow up every lead? Come on, this is weird. It's something," I commented, sounding frustrated. The agent paused, thinking about something with his blank slate of a face. It was hard to tell if the gears were turning in his head or not. Finally, he decided on giving me some information he held back. The local police had a vendetta against Jenna's father. He was able to walk off a charge of drunk driving. The woman he nearly killed is related to the chief of police. The drunk driving was the reason why Jenna's parents split up. Beforehand, he made threats and broke down their front door in a drunken rage. Everyone was convinced it was only a matter of time before he snapped and killed his family. The police had plenty of reasons to think he harmed his daughter, but I fear this case is more personal. The chief may only care about making that man's life a living hell instead of finding Jenna. It is possible they're not searching the woods in fear they find something that proves the father is not at fault. But I started not believing what I was hearing. They're risking a little girl's life over something like that? I believe the chief does not care about his career, let alone a little girl he has no relation to. Keep in mind, this is only a theory based on the actions of the police. I have no way of proving any of this. The only thing that is for certain is the police will not put the manpower into searching these woods unless they get a lead they cannot ignore. My teeth clenched together in frustration. I regretted how inexperienced I was. I didn't have any kind of connections I could call up to help. Only a guy that provided some computer work and camera setup when I needed it. If I was a real PI, I could have a bunch of people over here combing these woods for clues. I felt so useless trying to find this girl. Nicholas was an agent, but wasn't able to bring the big guns. Jenna had the bad luck of having a father who already wore a target on his back. If she wasn't taken by him, we were the only ones really looking for her. Nicholas noticed my shift in mood and spoke. We've already found a possible lead. Even without the same resources as the police, there is a chance to find something if we press on. We could find something better than 2 hanging candies. I nodded. He was right. At least we were searching for her. We continued on, not touching the candies and leaving them for the police to collect as evidence if they listened. Plus, they doubled as a trail back to the hiking path. I didn't know about Nicholas, but I was useless in the woods. I could get lost easily without something guiding us back. The agent followed behind me as I scanned the trees looking for more candies, but also any sign of the girl. Every time I thought we lost the trail, I would notice a twinkle off in the distance. If Jenna was following these, why would she go alone? Wasn't she with friends? I asked this when the thought came up. She had a small disagreement with her friends. She was lagging behind because she was angry with them. It's possible that she went off because the trail of candies was more interesting, but I can't say for certain. I wondered more about this trail we followed. Was someone just waiting the entire day hoping by chance someone went off the trail? It wasn't guaranteed that a victim would follow the candies deep into the woods, and normally people who snatched small children had preferences. Was Jenna really so unlucky to be good enough for the kidnapper to think she was suitable? This reminds me of Hansel and Gretel, I said while we paused to look for another flash of color in the trees. I looked over my shoulder expecting Nicholas to agree, but he looked at me with such a blank expression on his face. That made me think he never heard the fairy tale before. Slowly, he took out his notebook ready to write something down. This fully grown man never heard the tale and expected me to tell it to him? I gave him an abridged version while he made notes. Snapping his small notebook shut, he followed my footsteps towards another hanging treat. I don't understand the moral of the story. Don't these tales normally have one? Was there not a better way of dealing with their situation besides dooming their children by leaving them in the woods? He asked, and I didn't have answers for him. It's just an old fairy tale. I don't think having a moral is the point. And maybe leaving your kids to be eaten by bears made sense back then, I said with a shrug. As we walked, we traveled deeper into the forest. I brought along a flashlight so we could keep searching until dark if needed. A hopeless feeling came creeping into my gut as I thought of hundreds of different outcomes Jenna could have faced. If she wasn't at the end of this trail, then what? There's no way we could search the entire forest. I don't feel as if we're doing much, I admitted finally after walking in silence for a while. What if this isn't the right path? What if someone took her, or this has nothing to do with her? Nicholas stayed silent to let me take a drink of water. Again, he refused my offering of some. I was sweating in the warm spring night. I didn't know how he was staying so cool hiking in the woods in a suit. It is possible that someone took her off the trail, or she lost her way and is hurt somewhere waiting for someone to find her. We lack the resources to fully disprove all the theories of where Gemma may be right now. We can only see what is at the end of this trail, and if it leads to her or not, at the very least we are eliminating one possibility out of many. I felt annoyed that I didn't think of that obvious thing. Of course we could only do what was within our power. Finding a dead end meant there was one less lead to chase after and finding other ideas. I assumed Nicholas would be upset working with a novice like myself. I felt overwhelmed so quickly because this case was so different from the ones I normally took on. He didn't look upset in the slightest, only a bit glad he could convince someone to look in the woods with him. "Jenna's not your niece, is she?" I asked, risking the question. The way he talked about her felt distant. I doubted it from the start and wondered why he would lie. He didn't need to say she was related to him to have a reason to look for a little girl. "No, I apologize for the lie. In truth, I cannot rely on the police in this area, and there are no other agents to spare on such a minor case. I assumed you would be suspicious of my request, so I decided to give myself a more trustworthy reason to find the girl." I was wary of letting him lead me into the woods, but I felt as if this guy was a decent person. I just only hoped my gut didn't prove me wrong. Getting back to the case, I looked at a hanging candy off in the distance. I guess I could trust Nicholas, but what was waiting for us at the end of this trail? Was it just a prank, or would we come across someone dangerous? "Do you have a weapon at least?" I asked, and he nodded. I didn't see a holster on his small frame, but I did believe he was armed. I, for a few different reasons, didn't own a gun. Sure, I was a private detective, but I never took on a case that required one until that day. Overall, I just disliked them. And I had lousy aim the few times I went to a shooting range to practice. If I got out of these woods safely, I may change my idea about owning a gun. "Let's keep going and figure out if this trail means anything." The agent followed behind with a nod. If he was the one armed, you would think he would offer to take the lead. I was the one spotting the hanging candies, and from that I assumed I had better eyesight, which made me nervous. Would he be able to shoot a person at a distance if needed? Would it come to that? The answer came when we reached the end of the candy trail. It was an answer I never would have expected, although it was the most obvious one, as I even commented on it earlier. What would one even expect to see at the end of a breadcrumb trail in the woods? A cabin made out of candy. We walked into a small clearing to see the newly built wood cabin in the middle. There was no path leading to it. It made me wonder how anyone got the materials out in the middle of the woods and through the trees without leaving a trace behind. "I'll take the lead," Nicholas said, finally stepping in front. I followed behind him, hyper aware of any noise or lack of noise from the woods. The lights inside the cabin were not on, leaving the windows dark. Nicholas crept up the stairs and it sounded different. More of a hollow sound compared to the creaking wood I would expect. He stopped at the door, hand on the handle. Here I thought he would need a warrant to search it, but he looked as if he no longer cared about the legal process. When he commented about only wanting to find Jenna, he meant it. I didn't know if I should be right behind him, so I stayed on the first step. Instead of opening the door, he stopped with the handle in his hand. "Skylar, you said in that tale the cabin was made out of sweets, correct?" He asked, not looking in my direction. I looked over the normal-looking cabin trying to understand his point. "Well, yeah, but what does that have to do with..." Nicholas snapped off the handle, causing me to stop mid-question. He raised it so I could see the broken piece, my mind not understanding what I was looking at. Instead of a metal the handle should be, it was a light brown. Walking over, he placed the broken handle in my hand without warning. He then kicked the railing hard enough to send parts of it flying. It didn't splinter like wood, but rather cracked and crumbled. I jumped at the destruction, but I still didn't believe what I was seeing. Digging a fingernail into the handle, I took a small piece off and tasted it, confirming my suspicions. "It's chocolate?" I asked, dumbfounded. The railing was painted gingerbread, it seems. I assume the rest of the porch is either the same or painted chocolate. That couldn't be it. This was far too strange. Who the hell would build a realistic cabin out of gingerbread and chocolate? The windows looked like glass, but could be made of sugar. Hell, who could afford such a joke? I was shaking my head trying to figure out what we just walked into. "Stay behind me. I'm going to kick down the door." Nicholas didn't appear fazed by the odd turn of events in the slightest. "Wait, what? Aren't you wondering who the hell made this?" I asked, watching him walk back up the steps. "My working theory is a witch with a bad sense of humor," he said in his usual monotone voice, making it impossible to tell if he was joking. I was unable to respond as he raised a shoe now dirty from our walk in the woods and kicked the door to pieces. He went inside the dark cabin and I dropped the fake handle to go after him. I took my flashlight out to look inside and I really wish I didn't. It was empty aside from 4 piles of what looked to be slime on the far side of the room. Nicholas swiftly made his way over to the smaller pile. This was some X-Files shit, and and he was acting as if everything was perfectly normal. I followed behind him, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom of the cabin. It landed on one pile of the stiff, transparent goop. It took me a few seconds to clue into what I was seeing. My body jerked back in reflex, and I fell into the floor hard enough for one hand to break through the chocolate board. Inside the pile of goo was a skeleton, one with enough muscle on the bones and eyes remaining to make me sick. I quickly scanned the other piles just to see more bodies, each one in different stages of decomposition. The last pile and the one Nicholas made a beeline for was the one I feared most. Jenna curled up in the slime looking unharmed. I started, my throat closing up from tears. I blinked them away, knowing now was not the time to lose it. Nicholas tossed aside his suit jacket with no hesitation. He plunged his arms elbow deep into the mysterious substance and pulled out the small girl. It made an awful noise as her body was released, but the slime did not stick to her. He placed an ear against her chest while taking a pulse. But was she really alive? Unless we arrived a minute after she was placed inside that slime, how could she still be alive? She's fine, still breathing, but we need to get her some treatment. Skylar, please carry her so my hands are free to fight whoever did this. Unfortunately, we can't take the others out. My head was swimming from his words. With a shaking hand, I brought my flashlight over to the almost skeleton trapped in slime. The remaining eyes flickered and moved in the skull. I screamed, darting back and dropping the flashlight. It was impossible, but the others inside the piles of slime were still alive, almost down to bones, but still aware of what was happening. I dry heaved over the thought. If Nicholas didn't snap me out of my state, I doubt we would have gotten out of that cabin without me losing a part of myself. Skylar, we need to get her home. His tone was gentle and the kindest I've heard out of him so far. I nodded, squeezing my eyes shut, forcing the important matters to the front of my mind. No matter how impossible, confusing, and horrifying everything was, the only thing that mattered was getting Jenna out of those woods. I opened my eyes, now focused on the task at hand. Picking up the flashlight, I put it away, and then I picked up Jenna. Her small body felt far too light, but she was still warm instead of the cold corpse I thought she was when we arrived. I'll ask a shit ton of questions after all of this, I told Nicholas. I'll answer everything. Without anything else to say to each other, I started to get out of the cabin. I needed to pace myself. No matter how much I wanted to run, I was carrying extra weight and needed to be careful not to exhaust myself immediately. Being so focused getting down the stairs, I didn't hear Nicholas shouting my name. Turning, a blur of motion blocked my view of the agent. I held Jenna closer to protect her from whatever came between myself and the other man. The figure was covered in rags with tangled hair flowing out. Over the newcomer's shoulder, I saw Nicholas reach for his waist when he took his jacket off. I didn't see a holster, but I hoped he had a weapon hidden. The figure that ran between us was faster than him. I nearly tripped down the stairs as I watched in horror, unable to do anything to help him. The monster thrust out a clawed hand directly into the agent's stomach, staining his white shirt with blood. His body slammed against the gingerbread boards, cracking them. The figure didn't turn to face in my direction yet, so I didn't see what attacked. Instead, I saw Nicholas's pale face. Run. His request was barely above a whisper. The creature clutched the claw still deep in his chest and used his body to take out the walls of the cabin, dragging Nicholas into the dark place full of nightmares. Nicholas bought us some time. I didn't wait to watch what else the creature did to him. I did as he wanted and ran as fast as my legs would carry me and a still sleeping Jenna. While I ran, nearly out of my mind in fear, a cackling laugh echoed through the woods. In the back of my mind, a part of myself thought the laughing sounded like a witch. I ran until my legs could no longer move. I stopped against a tree, panting, with sweat dripping down my face. Adjusting Jenna in my arms, I gave her a quick check over to see if she was still all right. Just asleep and looking perfectly fine. My arms ached from carrying her, but I refused to set her down. Instead, I awkwardly placed her on my back, hoping the change in how I carried her would help my arms. I needed to keep going. The sun was setting, and I was hopelessly lost. No hanging candies in sight. Still, no matter how desperate the situation felt, I couldn't give up on this little girl going back home. It was the last thing Nicholas asked. I felt a pang of guilt through my chest. The thing that attacked him wasn't human. I knew that. Still, I felt as though I should have done more. If I was the one attacked, he might have had more hope of getting Jenna out of these woods. If only he was there, but he wasn't. It was a fact, and I needed to accept it. My breathing returned to normal, so I needed to keep going. Shifting Jenna a little, I stared back into the trees, listening in case I was followed. My heart jumped in my throat when I noticed a flash of color through the trees in the dimming light. I forced myself to run over to the hanging candy. I was positive I would never see it again. I started to look for a second one, but paused to think. Was the trail of candies made by the creature that attacked Nicholas and took Jenna? Could I trust where they lead? Did I even have any other choice but to follow them? My cell phone was in my pocket, but checking it I found it useless. The screen flickered, making it impossible to check even if I had a signal. I suppose if whatever was after us could keep someone alive as a skeleton, it could mess with a cell phone signal. My brain still couldn't believe half of what had happened that day. However, I didn't need to believe it. I just needed to get the hell out of these woods. As night fell, I decided to follow the candy trail, hoping it was the right choice. When it became too dark to see, I took the flashlight out to guide my way while still keeping a hold of the girl on my back. Every sound in the woods made me jump and scan the trees, looking for the source. There was no moonshine, making the woods so dark I couldn't see anything beyond my beam of light. Grabbing a flashlight that day was a good idea. My water bottle stayed inside my bag because I didn't know how long I was going to be in the woods. Every step I hoped for the hiking trail, but deep down I knew I should be prepared to be lost for at least a night. Cursing myself, I realized I dumbly didn't tell anyone where I was going. If I didn't make it out of here, no one would be looking for me, aside from my sister who I lived a state away from. I didn't have anyone in my life who would notice I was missing until at least a few days after. Walking along the dark woods, I feared I wouldn't find my way out every time I couldn't find the next hanging piece of candy after a few minutes. Without my phone, I was unable to know how much time had passed, but my body felt like I'd walked for hours. A wind blew, rustling the leaves and also bringing a soft whisper to my ears. Something that I couldn't dismiss as a natural sound. A voice from behind me fluttered in the air, so low I couldn't make out the words. When it came again, it was stronger and enough for me to hear what it was saying.
Give me that girl.
Turning on my heel in a blind panic, I directed the beam of light to the trees where that voice came from. A dark figure stood in the distance, almost too far for me to see. I heard the request again from a raspy low voice coming from that figure. When I didn't respond, it took a step closer, and I took a step back. When the figure moved, pale arms extended from the rags it used as clothing. The arms became so long it reached forwards, it could almost grab a hold of us. Instead, it took a step and the creature's legs grew in the same way the arms did. Nearly stumbling to the ground, my legs refused to move as the monster changed from a small figure in the distance to a massive thing. As it grew, trees were pushed aside to make room for the giant pale body. A tangle of hair remained over the face, leaving only a twisted grin visible. Wrapping long fingers around two trees, it brought that horrible face as close as possible to me, rancid breath ruffling my clothes.
Give me the girl.
Fuck that! Grabbing a fist-sized rock, I tossed it at the monster, knowing it wouldn't do anything. I then turned and ran again, refusing to face the monster that simply cackled at my response. The ground shook with the sound of laughter, nearly making me lose my footing. The last thing Nicholas said went through my mind. I didn't think about the monster or where I was going. I just thought of that one word. Run.